It's Saturday, August 24th, 2024, and we are 73 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini-episode. I'm Grant Herms. On the show today, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. drops out of the race, and I know you might be thinking, that guy was still running? Yes, he was. So if you don't know who Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is, I'm just going to run through a quick-ish primer here. So Kennedy is the son of Robert Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated during his campaign to be the Democratic nominee in 1968. His son, RFK Jr., was an environmental lawyer by trade for a long time and then really made his mark as an anti-vaccine advocate, specifically believing that vaccines caused autism. And then when that was debunked, although he still says he kind of believes that, he also pushed for this belief that vaccines cause mercury poisoning, which then causes autism. Neither of those things are true. During the pandemic, he began spreading all sorts of conspiracies like Wi-Fi causes leaky brains, or antidepressants are behind the United States mass shooting spikes, or chemicals in our water are creating transgender children. Again, none of that is true. He's also dabbled in racism and anti-Semitism, getting caught on camera at a dinner party musing about his theory that COVID was ethnically targeted at white and black people and that Chinese and Ashkenazi Jewish people were immune to COVID somehow, which also leans into this lab leak theory that COVID was cooked up in a lab in China and then dispersed on purpose to cause widespread death. Now, broadly, the scientific community does not believe that happened. They think most likely it was a natural mutation, which happens all the time with these kinds of viruses. This is not a podcast to go into that thing. There is also this aspect that is just the weirdness that has been the Kennedy campaign, including verified stories that he ate a dog while overseas in a different country doing some of his environmental work, which forced him to clarify that he wouldn't eat a person. He then also dumped the body of a bear cub in Central Park in 2014 after finding the carcass and then putting it into the trunk of his car and then realizing that he had a flight to catch, so he couldn't take it home for its meat, and then decided to dump it in the middle of New York City. He also disclosed in a deposition in 2012 that doctors found a worm in his brain that had eaten part of it. So, despite all of that, and in part of a lot of it, Kennedy was polling in the double digits, around 12% of the vote to about 15% of the vote in early July. But since Harris got into the race, his numbers cratered. And all of that brings us to what happened Friday. Amid his poll numbers dropping and his campaign funds pretty much running dry, Kennedy held a rally in Arizona saying he was dropping out of the race and throwing his support behind Donald Trump, and he says he wants his supporters to do the same. Now, there are a few ways to understand this. First, it's personal. As his campaign was floundering for the last few weeks, he reportedly had been reaching out to the Harris and Trump campaigns about his endorsement to bring his voters to their campaign. Kennedy said in his farewell speech that he tried to meet with Harris, but the campaign denied a meeting and wouldn't even take a phone call with him. Trump, on the other hand, has frequently said that he likes Kennedy and that some of his ideas were very interesting, but in the way that Trump says it, where it's a little unclear if he actually knows what Kennedy's views are, or if he's just saying it, or if he just likes him because they have similar enemies like Dr. Anthony Fauci. Another reason that Kennedy endorsed Trump was possibly quid pro quo. He gets something for his endorsement, which would be in line with how Trump sees the world. He's long talked about how he sees and understands the world as transactional. So this brings us to Kennedy's vice presidential pick. His running mate is named Nicole Shanahan, who was a billionaire Silicon Valley attorney whose fortune mostly comes on the back of her divorce from one of the founders of Google. Now, she is also a conspiracy theorist who has spread lies about the COVID vaccine. She called IVF one of the greatest lies ever told to women about their bodies. Well, now she said earlier this week that RFK Jr. might accept a cabinet position for something like the Director of Health and Human Services, putting the anti-vaccine, anti-science guy in charge of an agency with a $1.7 trillion budget. And while Kennedy said in his speech that Trump asked him about joining a would-be Trump administration, Trump himself told CNN he would probably appoint Kennedy to some kind of a position. So pretty explicit, but not a confirmation there. And Trump did say that he would release all of the JFK assassination records as part of a proposed commission he wants to start about all presidential assassination attempts. So Trump could see that as his end of a transaction in exchange for Kennedy's endorsement. Now, these kinds of deals, if there is a real spoken handshake deal here, aren't uncommon in politics, nor does it actually mean that they're corrupt in any way. It's how coalitions get built. It's how support gets built. And that leads me to the next thing here. How does Kennedy dropping out of the race affect the race overall then? Well, that's still a little unclear. We're not going to know much until the polls are put out into the field. This just happened yesterday, but we do know from the numbers before Kennedy dropped out, he was polling in a considerable amount of what were called double haters. I've talked about this before on the show, but these were the people who were unhappy with both Biden and Trump, and so they saw Kennedy as a third option, as sort of a protest vote. Now, once Harris entered the race, a lot of those double haters went to her, making Kennedy a liability for Trump. And more often than not, Kennedy had been a liability for the Trump campaign the entire time, just because of his anti-vaccine and conspiracy views. There was just more overlap between Trump's current voters and conspiracy theorists. But Kennedy really isn't bringing much to the table for Trump. When you look across the polls, which ask people who they would vote for, including and excluding other candidates, Harris only loses between 1 to 2 points, which would be enough for the Trump campaign in a really, really, really close race in some of those crucial states, but not enough for the Trump campaign to try and pour a lot of money into seriously courting Kennedy's voters. That being said, the Trump campaign is certainly interested in all of this. One of the campaign spokespeople posted an internal memo on X just after Kennedy dropped out, saying that their numbers show with Kennedy's votes, Trump will win every swing state, including winning Nevada by 50% and Wisconsin by 30%. Now, I have no idea where they're getting their numbers. The memo says it's an internal survey, but their numbers do not match anything that I am seeing coming out of any of these states. Frankly, they seem divorced from reality. And when I say that, I mean that I have not been able to find a single trustworthy poll whose numbers reflect the Trump campaign's numbers, nor does the overall math work out. The math is not mathing. I don't know what else to call it but dishonest at best. Regardless, though, the Trump campaign seems to think this is going to be a huge boost for them and might just be using it to energize their base after Democrats had such an exciting convention for them. The last thing I'll say here is the Kennedy family has completely disavowed Robert Jr., which is huge. The Kennedy family motto is "Consider the end," which has long been understood to mean family business stays within the family, and that includes speaking out against one another. Well, the Kennedys have repeatedly endorsed Harris and Walz and formerly Biden, and have repeatedly criticized Robert Jr., and each time they have, it's been more and more explicit. So yesterday, after he endorsed Trump, his brothers and sisters released a statement reiterating their support for Harris and Walz and said, quote, "Our brother Bobby's decision to endorse Trump is a betrayal of the values that our father and our family hold most dear. It is a sad end to a sad story." Okay, that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review and follow the show in your podcast feed so you don't miss out on any of these minis. I'm doing one of these a day until Election Day, or if it kills me, whichever happens first. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube and follow and share it on social media. It's on every platform as MIMS Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod. It's all one word. And also subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got extra articles, including what to make of the Palestinian protesters at the DNC this week. And I've got extended interviews with our guests, including this week's guest, Julia Azari. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.